Independence Day is a celebration of freedom, hard won and never guaranteed. In this special feature, Americans for Prosperity New Hampshire is joined by current and former state reps who fled communist regimes to find liberty in America. Now they serve their communities, defending the very ideals our founders fought for. This is a tribute to their journey and to the meaning of the American dream.
That is so different. Um, uh, so everything you read about in Orwell was real for us because thought crime, things like that. Nobody had to tell us to think that we're thinking incorrectly because we were telling ourselves. We were raised like it. It's multiple generations. So my grandparents were born right on the onset of the Soviet Revolution in 1914. So they never knew freedom, the freedom that the rest of the world knew. America did. And my parents were born right on the onset of the Second World War, and the Nazis invaded our city 2 weeks later. So my parents never knew freedom. I was born in the 70s, so I was born into the tyranny of the tyrannical state. I never knew freedom to begin with. But then I moved to America, and then my kids, they're the first generation born into freedom. So we know what it is. We never knew what we were missing to begin with. I was raised, a young pioneer. That's like a youth league of the Communist Party. And the adults were afraid to tell us otherwise. We had to believe in the Marxism, Leninism, we had to study all the works of the leaders, whatever the current leader was. They would die pretty quickly, so we'd have to study the new leaders' book in school. We had classes dedicated to studying all this garbage. The adults had to do it too. In colleges, they had to do it too. So this humongous waste of time. And the adults, I suspect now, I turned 18, yeah, right around 18 when I came to America. But I suspect the adults, they had to do it in factories, they had to do it in universities, wherever they work. They had to pretend that they believe in the dogma of communism, that they believe in this bright future. And later on, I realized they knew that it was all BS. They knew that they are lying to each other, but they had to pretend. Everybody knew everybody was lying to each other, but everybody had to pretend that it was real. So this was a society based on lies, 100% top down. So this is very unnatural way to live. This is not what humans should be like. Humans should be free. Humans should be free to think, to allow themselves to think. They should be free to express themselves. We had none of that. And should be free to live and prosper and to actually be honest to themselves and to each other. And this is where the great societies are built. So completely unnatural, completely inhuman way of living for 70 years, for 3 generations at least.
I was born and my childhood was in Soviet Russia. And back then, I often didn't know better because I didn't know any difference. Obviously, my family was relatively well off, like PhD level, but like for example, we often wouldn't have toilet paper at home, so we used the Soviet newspapers for that purpose. But as a child, I didn't know it's something abnormal. So it was only later, after Soviet Union collapsed and I grew up and I became interested in politics, and especially when I tried to open my own business and found that I'm paying more taxes and fees that I'm getting. So the things like that open your mind, and unfortunately, the more I was educating myself on economics and issues of political freedom, the more I saw that Russia was steadily moving in opposite direction. And as I joined libertarian and opposition forces in opposition to President Putin, unfortunately, in countries like Russia, the political discourse is often violent, so it's dangerous to be in the position to the ruling party and the ruling leader. So that's beginning of my study.
Well, my family history starts with my parents in Hungary. My mother left in the 1956 revolution, and my father, he left later, and they met in Vienna, Austria. For my dad, he had a lot of encounters with the old communist system. He basically, the reason he wanted to get out of Hungary was for economic freedom, and I think that's probably the most important freedom, because she can't eat, and what good is he, you know? And he was trained as a shop owner, an apprenticeship when he was a kid. He was born in 1923, by the way. And lo and behold, they dropped communism on his head. Somebody who's into business. He was jailed by the communists because he was doing what would come natural to most business people. You were allowed to keep some livestock in around your house area because that was just traditional way that people lived in, and but you weren't really allowed to sell anything, be a little bit more entrepreneurial, and people were hungry. So he ends up and goes and like produces extra livestock and sells it, and of course that's not legal because that's profiteering. So they locked him up. Well, when I visited my relatives in Hungary, and I was tuned in to what they were saying and what was going on, because I saw that it was like a very dreary existence. I mean, they went to work, but they could barely make ends meet because nothing mathematically adds up in a socialist system. A lot of people have side hustles or make ends meet. That's the only way you could get ahead is if you have a side hustle. And eventually, I think enough people got to that where that also helped to bring down the Iron Curtain. People realizing that this is just nonsense. We gotta stop it. We'll have to have these like crooked side hustles in order to be able to, well, crooked in as far as that the government didn't like it and didn't allow it. But normal, because where free markets don't exist, black markets develop, and that's exactly what was going on over there.
Yeah, so the freedom coming to America. I didn't have much time to prepare to read about it because I left it was still the Soviet Union. So they were just opening up literature to us, things that Soviets wrote in the 60s, 50s, describing the Soviet rule, were just being open to us. So we never actually had access to any information. Freedom of speech, obviously. Freedom of speech, freedom to information, freedom to express ourselves, and freedom to consume information. We had none of that. The media was tightly controlled. I remember my dad was saying that the only Xerox machine they had in the factory was guarded by KGB guard. It was in a locked room because spreading information to the people was prohibited by law. So we really didn't know anything. And we had the only information that would seep in would be through shortwave radio, Radio Free Europe, I believe, Voice of America, the BBC, Russian channel. The shortwaves, they bounce around the globe, so they reach the Soviet Union, and we had shortwave radios that we could listen to modern music, Western rock, news, things like Chernobyl. I was near when it exploded, maybe 200 miles away, and I didn't learn about it. The Soviets didn't tell us about it for 2 weeks. You guys knew because they picked it up in Sweden or Finland, someplace, but they didn't tell us for 2 weeks. It was May 1st, right? A week later, and everybody was outside marching, for the great May parade, and we had no idea what was going on. So those shortwave radios would bring us the information, and those who had them, who had tried to listen in, could receive something. So we kind of knew that something was going on, but those were being jammed throughout the Soviet Union. They had jamming stations. Later on I saw pictures. It's just arrays of antennas trying to jam the signal that the free world was broadcasting in. So total suppression of information, total thought control. Again, the gulags were gone by then, mostly. So it was self-control. It was people would get fired, left with nothing, because there were government jobs there. So okay, going back to the freedom. so I didn't have much to research, but I knew something existed, something different existed. And upon arriving into America, the material goods was a shock. It's a shock to everybody. So the supermarket, like, what do you mean you have 7 different kinds of cheese in the supermarket? We had 2, cheese, no cheese. So, and all of that was crazy. We were told very different things. Yeah. Everybody's destitute. Capitalists are oppressing everybody. Nobody's got anything. But even on TV, we saw the blue jeans, right? That was missing in Soviet Union. That cost probably a month's salary of an engineer to get. That were smuggled in. Every homeless who was wearing blue jeans out in the street, of New York. So we knew something was wrong with that message from the Soviets. And then initially I didn't have that much time to think again about the new freedoms, because I had to learn the language, I had to find work, I had to study, go to college. It is just later on that I started looking for more freedom. So moving from the Soviet Union was obviously a huge step up into American freedom of expression, First Amendment, Second Amendment, obviously freedom to do what you like. In the Soviet Union, I believe being unemployed was against the law. Simple things like that, speak your mind. But later on I started searching for more and started reading Rothbard, searching LuRockwell.com, Mises Institute, obviously the works of Ron Paul. I think late 90s is where I actually got up to speed on them. And then from there it took, it expanded to more and more. I was looking for more and more freedom, and this is how I ended up here. So we start building, we don't start building freedom in North Korea where there's none. We find the best place where it exists and we expand it. Yeah, that's where we're most effective.
So coming to America was an interesting experience for me. My first time I went abroad from Russia was Bulgaria, and even Bulgaria was felt like a new world to me. And when I came to America and visited New Hampshire first time, I was on those wonderful interstates, and I was, all the people. Like in Russia, we had like one road around Moscow that looked kind of similar, but it was a road for 20 million people. So I'm like, if you have a road that wide, there should be a million people hiding in the forest somewhere. So it took some adjustment to the prosperity that America is enjoying and different freedoms. Like when I organized some rallies in Russia, police was after us. They would try to find us, like if somebody step on grass or something. And here I see some anarchists like protesting federal government, standing and like no permission, and nobody were bothering them for expressing their opinion. So small things like that. It was even though I knew a lot about America, like visiting it for the first time, it was still eye-opening. I came to ideas of political liberty from more like a psychological perspective. I was studying about liberty in your head, liberty in management, and how letting people to open their potential leads to for example, profits in the company. And then I came to discover this idea of political freedom and liberties. And what fascinates me that it's both moral and eventually leads to prosperity in the nation. And this combination, it's just wonderful that if we lessen taxes, if we lessen regulations, it's not just like budget will go dry, but it will lead to more production in the state or in the nation. And that's why I think fighting for liberty is so important.
So the American independence, so that I would consider the extreme freedom that I'm passionate about, because they left the king behind. Oh, the king wanted to rule the colonies, obviously, but they left the rule of the king behind, and they brought the best with them. Magna Carta, obviously, they brought property rights with them. When they wrote, when the founders wrote the Declaration, for example, they wanted nobody above them but God, obviously. So they wanted no kings, and nothing like that I don't think existed ever before in history. So they came to the New World and they created something that didn't exist, which is extreme freedom. They had to fight for it, obviously, because the kings didn't want to let go. They never do. But they created the extreme freedom that I like, the extreme freedom that never existed elsewhere. When they wrote the Declaration of Independence, where the man was free to do as he wanted to do, to be what he wanted to be. That's what the American independence means to me, and obviously they enshrined it in the Declaration and later on in the Constitution. And that always amazes me, because I think it's 80 years before Karl Marx was born. They knew what tyrannical government is like. They envisioned, again, the Soviet Union, we're talking probably the most extreme tyrannical government that existed, the first one, of China, later on, the National Socialists in Germany. But 80 years before Karl Marx was born, before he created that hell on earth, they knew that they had to prevent it here in America, in the New World. And they enshrined it in the Constitution, and it served us well, us, Americans well, over 250 years almost. There are some flaws, but if you look at the rest of the world, if you look at the Western countries, they have no freedoms left. I'm not even talking the Second Amendment, I'm talking the first. You cannot speak your mind in Britain, Germany, I don't know, France, nowhere. There's Australia, I don't know what other countries, nowhere. This is just complete nonsense what they turned into. But the America still got it. We still have those freedom enshrined in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, obviously the First, Second Amendment. And we got to maintain them, because we're not like anybody else. And we have the freedom that nobody else has.
The founding fathers, they, I guess, distilled the wisdom of the previous eras, and what they produced here was brilliant and very thought out. And I think a lot of people don't really appreciate that, because they built for liberty into the system. The way they, and then of course the Bill of Rights on top of that helps, as a bedrock for the whole thing. Their philosophies, obviously, because my background is in philosophy, and Jefferson, of course, took from Locke, and then they took from the ancient Greeks. So they were really standing on the shoulders of giants, and they also became giants themselves.
The liberty is very important for life, and especially life is something unstable. The same as liberty is, it's always one step from extinction. And those who signed the Declaration of Independence, many of them suffered deeply. Some lost their houses, some lost even their families. But it's important that we have the spirit of live free or die, and we have people who are ready to put even their life on the line to protect not just their own liberties, but liberties for other people, and that takes some beliefs and some courage, because it's easy to fight for your industry, for your union, but sometimes it takes um, it takes a real man to fight for liberties of other people, even if I don't directly benefit from that. In conclusion, I just want to thank America for having me here and for letting me to build my American dream here. And after I was blessed with that, I have some spare time to run for office, being elected, and trying to help other people to build the American dream as well.